Today, we're not going to talk about predicting the future. We're talking about building for it. We're going to dive deep into the playbook that big institutions use for risk. And here's the twist. They don't treat it as something to forecast. They treat it as something you can architect, something you can engineer to withstand just about anything.
So, that brings us to the big question, right? When the markets go completely haywire and it feels like the financial world is just falling apart, how do the big players, we're talking hedge funds, pension funds, those massive institutional traders, how do they manage to navigate the storm? Well, I can tell you it's not magic, and it's definitely not a crystal ball. It's a completely different way of thinking about the problem.
And that key insight really comes down to understanding two very different mindsets. On one side, you've got the calculator. This person is obsessed, always hunting for that one perfect formula that can predict the future. But on the other side, you have the architect. And the architect, they're not trying to predict anything. They're trying to prepare. They build systems that are designed from the ground up to be resilient no matter what happens.
This shift in thinking, from calculator to architect, it's absolutely fundamental. You see, institutions learned the hard way that real-world markets are messy. They don't follow the nice, neat bell curves you see in textbooks. So they just stopped trying to forecast the exact path of the storm and instead started building a fortress designed to withstand it.
In this quote, this really gets to the heart of it all. The goal isn't to find some perfect, magical formula. It's about building a strong, defensive structure. It's about constructing a portfolio that can take a punch from an uncertain future and just keep on standing. That right there is the core of the institutional approach.
So, how do you even start building a structure like this? Well, it all begins with measurement. But you can't just measure anything. It's about using the right tools to see the real dangers, especially those hidden, catastrophic risks that, honestly, most people just ignore.
For a long time, the standard tool for this was value at risk, or VAR. It's a simple number, and boy, do regulators and risk committees love it. It answers a pretty straightforward question. With 95% confidence, what's the most I can expect to lose on any given day? Sounds useful, right? Well, here's a fantastic way to think about it. VAR tells you there's a 5% chance you're going to get wet. But, and this is the key, it makes no distinction between a light drizzle and a full-blown tsunami. All it tells you is the probability of a loss, but it says absolutely nothing about the severity when things actually go wrong.
And that brings us to the architect's tool of choice, conditional VAR, or CVaR. It answers a much more important question. If that 5% event happens, if that tsunami actually hits, what is the average size of my loss going to be? CVaR measures the size of that tail risk, those rare but devastating events, giving you a much realer sense of the danger you're actually facing.
And hey, if you need proof that CVaR is superior, just look at the global regulators themselves. Under the Basel III framework, the world's most important banks are now required to measure and report their expected shortfall. That's CVaR. The industry has officially said, you know what? We need to measure the size of the tsunami, not just the chance of rain.
Okay, so you've got the right measurement tool in hand. The next step is all about action. This is where you build a dynamic defense by embedding adaptive rules directly into your portfolio's architecture.
A core strategy institutions use here is called volatility targeting. It's actually a pretty simple, systematic process. First, you forecast what market volatility is likely to be in the near future. Second, you compare that forecast to your own target level of risk. And third, you adjust your exposure accordingly. If markets are calm, you might take on a bit more risk. If markets get chaotic and volatile, the system automatically tells you to pull back. It's like a built-in dynamic shock absorber.
Now, the next rule is the absolute bedrock of discipline, position sizing. The CFA Institute standard, and that's pretty much the gold standard in the industry, is that you risk no more than 1 to 2% of your total capital on any single idea or trade. This isn't just a suggestion, it's a fundamental rule of survival.
And finally, the architect builds in a psychological failsafe. Think of it as a circuit breaker. A hard daily loss limit, say 2.4%, that if you hit it, shuts down all trading for the day. No questions asked. This is designed to prevent one of the most destructive human emotions in finance, revenge trading, where you get angry and try to aggressively win back your losses, which usually makes things much worse.
All right, now we get to the absolute core of the architectural mindset. It's all about understanding the brutal, unforgiving mathematics of loss and why playing defense is so much more important than playing offense.
So let me just ask you a simple question.
If you lose 50% of your capital, what percentage gain do you need just to get back to even? Think about it for a second. The answer might really surprise you, and it reveals everything about why this stuff matters so much.
This right here is the math of survival. A 10% loss, you need an 11% gain to recover. Okay, that's manageable. But a 20% loss needs a 25% gain. And look at this, a 50% loss, you need to gain 100%. You have to double your remaining money just to get back to where you started. And a 75% loss requires a 300% gain. The relationship isn't linear, it's exponential. Large losses aren't just psychologically painful, they are mathematically devastating.
So the crucial point, the single idea that underpins this entire architectural philosophy is this: capital preservation is everything. Your single most important job is to avoid the big loss, because that math of recovery is working so incredibly hard against you.
So, we have the mindset, we have the tools, and we have the rules. Let's put it all together. Let's assemble them into a final blueprint for financial discipline, a clear, actionable plan for executing this architectural approach to risk.
Here are the core principles, plain and simple. First, measure what actually matters. Use CVaR to see the size of the real danger. Second, build in those dynamic defenses, like volatility targeting. Third, obey the unforgiving math of survival by setting strict limits on your losses. Fourth, enforce disciplined sizing without 1 to 2% rule. And finally, and this might be the most important one, let the system you've built guide your actions, not your emotions, in the heat of the moment.
So, we've walked through how the biggest players build their financial structures to withstand uncertainty. The principles are really clear. You measure the real dangers, you build dynamic defenses, and you let the cold, hard math of survival guide your every move. This turns risk management from a guessing game into a true discipline. So the only question left for you is, what does your financial architecture look like?